We appreciate you guys joining us at Lake Fork Marina for our free seminars. It's getting to the slower time of year, less people on the lake. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think all of us that are still here at the lake probably think it's a beautiful thing, and we appreciate all of y'all watching online as well. Fall is an interesting animal when it comes to bass fishing. It can be the most frustrating and most confusing time of the year, no matter what lake you're on. We really saw good examples of that last year when we finally saw the top level tournament guys fish a fall series, right? Because of COVID and everything else, those guys on the Bassmaster Elite Series fished several lakes at the end of the year. Lucky for us, they fished, if you really look, they fished a kind of a murderer's row of just amazing bass fisheries, like big bass, hammerhole lakes, just like Lake Fork was one of them. We had Santee Cooper, which is one of the all-time greats, Chickamauga, one of the all-time greats. It was a really good stretch of amazing lakes, but what you saw, if you paid attention, was on Santee Cooper, a couple guys caught them pretty good. On Chickamauga, they kind of all struggled. On Fork, basically Patrick destroyed them, and then a couple guys caught them decent. But the majority of the field of the best anglers in the world struggled in the fall. And they would have a big bag one day, a little bag the next. Just like you saw with Rick Clunn, 30 pounds on day one, and I think 8 pounds on day two.
Exactly.
It was just, that's a lot of fall fishing goes that way. And I know from speaking with our biologists that have done our tracking survey here on Lake Fork, that fish move more in the fall than they do any other time of year. They have found that, more than half of the fish, a slight majority of the fish, will have an actual home range throughout the year. And they will stay kind of in one little small area. A really small area throughout most of the year, spring, winter, summer, all that. And even though some of those fish are down to every time they track them, they're on the same stump or the same dock post. They're right there every time they go find them. They're right there. And then in spring, they may move a little bit, get up on the bank, but then they come right back. And they're not very far away from it. But in the fall, they lose some of those fish. They go so far away from there, they can't even find them with that little beep, beep, beep thing that they use to track those radio tracking deals. They really, really move a lot in the fall. We know bait fish move a lot in the fall, and those fish get locked in on bait fish. That's kind of the traditional understanding of what happens with bass in the falls. They get locked on bait and they follow that bait fish around. And one thing I know about bait fish is, as dumb as a bass is to go around biting plastic and metal every day, a shad is 100 times dumber, and they do really crazy stuff for no reason at times, and they wander all over the pond just however the wind blows. Sometimes takes them around following plankton or whatever else they're doing. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. It's really hard to understand and predict where shad are going to end up at times, especially when they're moving as much as they do in the fall. Now, in general, we know they're going to go to the backs of creeks. We know they're going to go back there. I think it's an oxygen and temperature deal. Oxygen coming out of turnover, they're looking for more oxygen. Shallow water has more. Temperature-wise, it's a comfort thing. They stay in the backs of creeks because of the cooling temperatures till it starts getting too cold. Then a lot of them go back out to the main lake to try and get deep, stay warm in the winter. So that's kind of the general basis of how shad move around in the fall. But you can be in one section of a creek one day and have all of them right there. And then the next day they can be in a completely other section of the creek. And when you're dealing with major lakes like Lake Fork, which is really not even that big, but a lake the size of Fork or any of the other much bigger lakes, some of these creek arms are bigger than a lot of lakes. They are. If you look, we got small lakes all over East Texas, and these creek arms out here sometimes are, 5 times bigger than some of our small lakes. So you can lose a school of fish and lose shad even when they're in the back half of a creek. Real easy. It's real easy to do. So it's difficult. That's all the challenges that we deal with in the fall. There's a lot of factors that can go into that. So what I want to try to do tonight is I want to try to help you guys, and I want to use David to do it. I want to try to help you guys understand and think about the conditions that you have for the day, whether it's weather trend, wind trend, solunar phases. That matters a lot for feeding times. When fish are just feeding, those activity hours of the moon phases matter a lot. And the thing that I think gets lost in our society today, I think it's one of the many things, honestly, that's lost in our society today is to, and I say this, he's an old man. He knows he's an old man. But with all due respect to him, he's been doing this for a very long time. He's been fishing these lakes in East Texas for over 35 years. He has a ton of experience, and I've gotten to fish with him a little bit more and more this year. And something that I really understand about David today is he works is harder than anybody I've ever known at fishing. He's obsessed with it. It don't matter whether he's got a guide trip booked or not. He's out there grinding. That's what he does. 2, the experience level that this man has is unbelievable. And I think in our society, something that I was taught as a kid, and I know all the older generation was taught, is you respect your elders because they know more than you. They know more than you, whether they're smarter than you or not, because they've been there and seen it and done it. And this is one of those aspects of that in bass fishing that I've learned fishing with David is he knows more than me about different conditions and how fish are going to behave during different times of the day based on those conditions. He has knowledge of things that I just don't have. I kind of go and fish by instinct and do this, and I'm, been fortunate enough to make a living doing this and all that, but I'm pretty young in my bass fishing, full-time bass fishing career. David's been doing it for so long. He just has a lot more little things that he knows, and I've learned so much from him already, and so I want you guys to be able to learn from him as well. So I wanted David to kind of talk to us about all the different factors, and something that we just did yesterday that you guys are going to see on Monday's video. And it was a grind this week, and the morning bite, in all honesty, was pretty bad. I mean, it was really tough. The morning bite's been really tough all week. And David really kind of told me why, and I really didn't understand why, but kind of walk us through what we've been experiencing.
This time of the year is really interesting in the fact that the transition has waves to it like this, meaning that there's peaks, there's valleys, there's peaks and there's valleys.
Good one day, bad the next.
The reason why that is, it has to do with the water temperature, whether it's increasing in temperature or it's decreasing in temperature, a trend. All right, so if you're 2, 3, 4 days in a row we have cold mornings, the water temp starts to decline in temperature. That has a negative effect on the fish. They're Florida strain bass, and those Florida strain bass are way more sensitive than a northern strain bass would, or a regular bass would be. All right, that's one factor. What Billy and I had yesterday, also, there's another couple of more factors involved with that, and the one major factor at this time of the year was the full moon cycle that we were on. And I kind of suspected when we got over there, I told him, I said, the bite might not be till later in the day, and I've seen this happen countless numbers of times.
Let me give a little bit backstory on this. So we tried to film on Wednesday and had mechanical issues. We had graph issues, spent half the morning fixing that. Then we had a trolling motor issue that locked us up for the day. We couldn't get the video done. And I have on Thursdays, I have a time restriction where I have to get my kids from school in the afternoon, so I got to be done by 2:30. And so I took him to, I was worried about us not having a full day, not being able to get a video filmed in the fall when you don't know what's going to happen. So I took him to a little secret hammer hole right down the road from my house, and he's talking about how it's going to be slow. I'm like, bro, you don't know where we're going. Like, you don't understand. It doesn't matter if it's slow on this lake. We're just going to go there and catch them however we want to catch them. But he was right. We got there, and then go ahead. Now tell them what happened.
An interesting sidebar to this before I keep going was that we did that on Monday, right? Or what day we?
Wednesday was the first day we tried to film out Wednesday, here, and we broke down.
When we went in there, I told him, I said, we're right on a full moon cycle. Yeah. We got in there early, 7:30 in the morning. You were sitting in the spot in there, and I told him, I said, we might need to be here about 2 o'clock. And with the water, looked at the water temp was 70 degrees. It had come down to 70 degrees, cooler mornings, and then that factor alone. And then when you got a bluebird day and you have very little wind, all right, that's going to be a really bad contributor to it also, especially if you're dealing with barometric pressures that are 30-20, 30-30, 30-40, all right? And so you got to factor all this in. Well, long story short, that where we saw him in there that day, you catch 2 little bitty ones. We catch 2 little bitty ones in there in that area. He goes back in there today, and the same area. All right, now the water temp's trending up.
I haven't even heard of this yet.
Water temp's trending up a little bit
because it warmed up yesterday.
Exact spot. Yeah. All right, the water temp's trending up. We're further behind the cold front. All right, we're further behind the cold front, and there was some wind blowing in there, at least more than we had the other day. And what does he catch? He catches 7, 8, 9, 7 fish in there in that same place. We couldn't even get a bite. So in this one little back of a creek, and so I already told him that's what was probably going to happen. I think if you go in that same place between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock, home run. That's when I think those fish will feed. So when he and I went over there to that lake yesterday, same story. We're throwing some moving baits. I'm throwing a chatterbait. He's throwing a rattle trap. We're throwing some stuff. No bites, no bites, no bites, no bites. Enough of this. I said, they ain't gonna bite. So I get in the bottom of the boat. I dig out a Cinco. I put a Cinco on, and we're up around a little mat of junk there, and second flip up there by it, boom, first fish. And I'm rubbing it in his face. And, it was a good deal, So I got it all rigged up, we got one on camera, throw back in there again, boom, another bite. So what does Gingerfoot here do? He says, okay, I got something for you. He gets in there and ties on a black and blue jig, all right, because he's going to slow down too.
Yeah.
And it was 7:30, 7:45, whatever in the morning. And then we hack along there, and we get in another little deal here that early in the morning. And sure enough, he catches a 5 something, whatever, and you have 3 or 4 bites right after that because you had to slow down, you had to move slow.
We were able to get a bite here and a bite there by slowing down, and that was your call on slowing down. And then the bigger fish deal was all that happened was once it slowed down, I was like, well, let's go back out here to a stop sign area. I knew where some brush piles were on a creek swing, and I'm like, if they're not up roaming these deals and they're inactive and we got to grind, let's go over here to a prototypical big fish stop sign area, put a jig in there, and then it paid off and I got a bigger bite. But
we fished it long enough that it was getting later in the morning. And so what ended up happening was that by the time we got to looking at it, and then he had, we got another spot over here, so we got on that spot in water this deep, and he throws up in there and he catches another 4 or 5 pounder up there on a square bill, and all that's recorded. And then we catch, God dog, we caught quite a few off that. But now it's back to what I said, 11 o'clock. Now we're easing along. And then we moved over to another spot. Now it's 12:30 or so, and it was big game on. And we started catching some good 4 and 5 pounders. He catches one close to 6, so, and it was all, the puzzle just fell into place with what it would normally do under these conditions.
Well, how did you know? So here's my, and I know it's just experience or whatever, but talk to us about kind of your understanding of the frontal systems, the wind direction, because that was another factor yesterday. We had a wind direction change where it was out of the north, which means you're in a post-frontal situation when it's out of the north with bluebird skies. But just the moon cycle, the water temperature, like how do you know all that? And like where do you come up with all this? And how can we get these people to understand how things happen and be able to take this forward in their fishing?
It's been a lot of years because I'm a tournament junkie, all right? So if you're a tournament junkie and your trial and error, your failures and your successes, you've learned. And thank God that I can remember all this stuff after all these years. But through the highs and the lows of the tournament fishing, then you know that under this condition here, I'm going to have to be doing this. Now, the next day, the condition changes where this was good the day before sometimes is not as good anymore. In the case where this gentleman here was fishing in an area where the wind changed and now the wind's blowing in a different part of that pocket, and boom, that's where they was in a different part of that pocket. And so the same identical thing happened to my tournament partner yesterday and the day before at Tawakoni. He was fishing something over at Tawakoni in an area where when the wind changed, the fish changed also. So that plays a big role, and you have to be keen to thinking about those conditions and how these are favorable to, and you know what, look at it this way, it's not far over there, hey, it's just tow over your boat over there and make some casts, if it's a windy bank or if it's a non-windy bank. Too many people get stuck in the adage of, well, it's more comfortable to fish a non-windy bank, but it's not as productive to fish a non-windy bank. So you'll always do better where it's uncomfortable versus comfortable. So anyway, but
it's a combination of factors, right?
It's a combination, and
there's always
those
a combination.
Factors change. Now, the evolution of these days that go by is how all of a sudden you could go back into the area where this gentleman here was, say today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, as long as we still got a south wind flow, then that bite is going to transition earlier. I told him, and I think I told you this yesterday, I said the first rattle, at this time of the year on Fork, he said, I'm not going to mess with this conditions, I'm not going to mess with this shallow stuff until 2 o'clock. I'm going to be out in 10 to 15 foot early on, and that's where I'm going to end up having my best day because I know that I'm going to catch some better quality late in the afternoon, later in the day.
When you're in that 10 to 15 foot of water, you're going to be slowing down, fishing slow.
We'll throw your most favorite technique, drop shot or shaky head.
Yeah, he's slowing down.
Or a Carolina rig.
He's slowing down.
Any of those 3 is what you would normally throw in there. You won't have as much luck on a big crankbait, now you could throw a jig also. And that's still a good play to use.
Slow bait, but you're throwing slow baits.
But as confirmation to that, all right, number one, there was a local guide here on the lake, and he posted on Facebook 2 days ago, And I happened to look at it, and he said exactly that. He said, I started deep in the morning, deeper in the morning, and he ended up with 17 by lunch, and that was only a half-day trip. And then he wanted to move shallower when he got closer to lunch, and they still caught 2 or 3, he said. So that gives you an idea. Now, as these days are warmer, you catch a warmer trend where the water temps all of a sudden peak up a little bit, then those fish in those creeks will be more active, and they'll be more apt to bite under those conditions. But as soon as it comes to a halt, the cold front comes through, look at what the overnight lows are going to be, and that'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. Shallow water will cool astronomically faster than deep water will. Your main lake temperature will go down a lot slower, but your creeks or arms of creeks, pockets are going to just crater. And those fish, sometimes you get into October, November, when you'll get a 7 or an 8 degree differential from the day before in that area to now today, Florida strain, they just won't bite. And I guarantee you're wasting your time shallow. You have to move out a little bit. And like I told him yesterday, I did an experiment, as far as I play with light line a lot and to see if I can get more bites. And I didn't tell him this, but we were in some dirty water, and I wanted to see if there was an advantage to this light line versus I knew he was going to be throwing 17. Well, we had the same amount of bites, but I'm using lighter tackle, and I didn't have as many hookups as he did. I mean, when you wrench on it as hard as he does, when he sets a hook on that 6-pounder, I mean, that rod just whistles in the wind. Woo! When he sets on it. But he's using heavy equipment, heavy line, and he stuck that fish good. I lost
Dave goes, you need me to lip him? I go, get out of the way. Bring it in.
and so I lost 2 3-pounders at the boat. For the same thing, because I'm using that light tackle and light line, and
that's all part of the game too on that line deal. I mean, we could have this line debate all night between me and you. I know we could, but lighter line will get you more bites in the right situations. I lean towards bigger line because I know when I get a bite, I can take control of the fish and whatever cover he's in, and I can bring him in. And it's a decision that everybody has to make for themselves.
And I'm all about when the game is against us, I want to still get some bites. All right, and so I put that Senko on 12-pound line, all right, in that morning, and you know what? We survived. We got some bites on it. When I was throwing it in a brush pile out there, when we moved where he caught the big fish, I caught a decent one out of it also. Mm-hmm. I had 2 out of it is what I had on that lighter line, so that's just an adjustment that you'll make in order to get you through the key window, which is going to be later in the morning, if not, especially on a bluebird day. As far as that goes. And so those kind of things you can literally take to the bank and use those effectively all the time. And you have to play the conditions as they are. You watch those pros fish out there, every day, what do they tell you? They're playing the conditions. Oh, yeah. And every day the conditions might change. You'll see, I watch these guys on TV and they were smashing them on a certain pattern, a certain area. The next day they're doing something totally different. Did they run out of fish? No, but the wind is not on this bank anymore, or this pocket, or
you went from a cool trend to a warm trend.
There's an amazing amount of variables that go into this game. So let's
to kind of hopefully simplify that and help and make this information more helpful to you guys. What I'd like to do right now, David, let's break down the different variables or some of the different variables one by one. So let's start with the first one that's the most obvious. It's the easiest to find out because it's right in front of you on your electronics every day. Let's start with water temperature. For me, and I think you'll agree with this, man, the trend is so much more important than the actual number. 70-degree water temperatures are phenomenal water temperatures, but not when it was 80 5 days ago or 3 days ago.
Bingo.
Right? So the trend is much more important when you're deciding how to fish than the actual temperature. If the water temperature is declining, if we're dealing with a cool trend, so don't even worry about what the raw temp is. Let's just talk about when the water temp is cool trending, like a slight cool trend to an extreme cool trend. How do we adjust? What do we go about to do to catch fish in a cool trend water?
And that's what I do. I go to lighter line and smaller baits in order to
slow down,
right?
Slow
down, and slow everything down. And that's why number one thing, especially in tournaments, is that in the first 3 hours of the morning, I want to have a shot at catching a good fish like he did out of that brush pile, at the not so favorable time of the day. And if we were on a stringer tournament yesterday, he catches a good fish to keep, that helps. Versus if we'd have stuck with throwing the chatterbaits and moving baits all day, we'd have been 0 by 11 o'clock.
You get those bonus fish, the fish you wouldn't catch.
This is a bonus fish, and you have to adjust to it in order to
when
get
they're not really biting, you go ahead
and that's a tournament thought train. When you're in a stringer tournament, fishing either bass champs or fishing elites or whatever the case. I mean, you watch guys, you talk to Lee Livesay, guys like that, you understand they are even 4 clicks sharper than this and understanding what that water does and when they can make those adjustments in order to get them further along, so that when they do get to the fill up the live well session, they're going to be ready to go. They don't want to wait till the last 2 hours of the day to build a 5-fish stringer. Nobody does.
So is it as simple as the more the water cool trends, the more extreme the cool trend is, the more you go finesse and slow down, and then the more the water warm trends, the more you can upsize and be more aggressive, more power fishing?
So the water, like you said, came from 77, 78, and then overnight it was dropped down to 70. Next day, it might warm back up to 73, then it drops right back down to the 70, all right, in the mornings. And so now we get 2 warm nights in a row, then all of a sudden you'll see that you get in that same location. Now all of a sudden the water's 72, 73 in there, first rattle out of the box in the morning. And okay, it's a little better, but the trick is it's on the incline, right? And so you have a chance to catch some on that moving bait. The next day you come in there, if we had another warm night and a hot day, like a 90-degree day in the fall, then all of a sudden those fish will bite earlier in there. Now, there's one, and this is, I have to pin this on the full moon cycle. The further you get away from the full moon cycle, then that earlier bite will become better, right? Always on a full moon cycle, those fish are going to bite right at daylight. If you can get them to bite, then there's going to be a huge lull, right, until the later morning window, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and then almost all your bites are usually going to be in the afternoon on a full moon cycle or a new moon cycle. Either one of those two. We get a week away from this, in that area you were setting in, I would think you're not going to have a problem at all getting bit in there, especially if it's a warming trend.
And the moon cycles go roughly in about 2-week cycles from full moon to new moon.
Right.
What I've always understood is when the moon is overhead or underfoot, that is your peak activity hour for basically all of nature.
Exactly.
But for fish, it's your peak feeding time when the moon's overhead or underfoot. And when it's off to the sides of you, it is a secondary activity period. So when it's in between, and if you'll look on a full moon, right, whenever you get to the lake, right at daylight, it goes down to the side, and then it's below you. So now it's at a quartering angle. Well, that's the lull that David's talking about in the morning. And then it's below you on a dead full moon. It's below you right at noon, right? Somewhere within a few minutes, 15 minutes of noon, it's going to be right below you. That's going to be your major feeding cycle, right? Other than midnight when it's directly above you. Right. And then on a new moon, it becomes the same deal, just the opposite, right? At midnight, the moon's below you. At noon, it's directly above you. So that's why on the full moon and the new moon, those morning hours can be really tough, because you're coming out of a secondary cycle and you're going into that lull until you hit the major cycle at noon.
And those of you who fish regularly, you're not just here every great now and then, but if you're here and fish, quite often, you'll see that, wow, I had a great day today, and then all of a sudden I don't understand why, in this area has been holding this, now I can't get a bite. That's the type of thing. That's the way that fluctuates. Those fish aren't going anywhere. I would so love to have an aftermarket tracker and be able to put on these fish and, number one, see, did they move and leave like your guys said with the Parks and Wildlife, or are they still there and they're just not feeding? In most cases, those fish are residents. They live in a lot of those places. I think the number from what he and I talked about before, and you had some conversations with those guys, that a very small amount of those fish, those residents, will swim way away. And I think that I'd love to know what that percentage is.
Well, throughout most of the year, it's like 20 to 30% of the fish are the only ones that move around throughout most of the year. About 70 to 80% of the fish stay in the same.
And that's exactly
in the same layer.
That's where I'm going with that.
But in the fall, and I think that's one of the things that makes the fall one of the more confusing times of year, because one thing is fall can be amazing, as you guys saw in the 200-pound video last week or earlier this week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you hit that big school and they're feeding, there's nothing quite like that the rest of the year. I mean, they get in these big wads, these big groups, and they're only feeding. That's their only job this time of year, is to feed. And they're hungry because they just came out of summer. So when you hit that, it's amazing. But when you have bigger schools of fish, you have a higher percentage of the lake that is completely empty. And when they're moving around a lot, it's real easy to lose them or miss them day to day. And so in the fall in particular, it adds to the complication of all these changing conditions, which we also have in the fall, a ton of changing conditions, right? It's 86 one day and it's 72 the next day, or it might be 65 next week and then 85 the next day. So you have all these changing conditions added with the normal changing conditions. See, we always deal with wind changes, we always deal with moon cycle evolutions, and we always in Texas somewhat deal with weather change, but in the fall it's pretty extreme. Then you add to that fish are moving more, and it's what makes the fall frustrating. Just frustrating. It's just frustrating. It is. Because as good as it can be just as bad in the fall. It's a very extreme case of that because you're adding more fish movement to the normal factors that we all have to deal with.
And to go along with another level of that is barometric pressure and what that does to the fish.
That's another factor we're always dealing with.
Ken, the big spinnerbait bass guy that passed away many years ago, Ken, he was world famous on the bass fishing tour. Not Ken Smith, I don't remember what it was. Ken something. He always said that because he was a biologist, in that whenever you've got high pressure, it exerts pressure down on the water. It pushes on the water, and his logic behind that was it makes the bigger fish feel full, and that's why the bigger fish don't bite under a high pressure situation. And what I've learned over time in dealing with this and understanding that, not only when I get in a high pressure situation, I'm going to size down, gear down in a situation like that, but they almost always on a high pressure bite late in the day, late in the afternoon. And just the other day we were on a spot and we were fishing another lake, and we had a few, but I started them late intentionally because of the pressure was 30-32. And we started at 11 o'clock. We only had a very few at 3 o'clock, and then between 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock, Katie barred the door. We whacked them, right? And I was driving away and coming back, and I checked the Siri again, asked Siri, what is the barometric pressure at my location? And it dropped down like 8 or 9 points just in the afternoon alone. And so it was just enough. Those fish will almost always bite in that window whenever it's high pressure situation, almost always, even if it's 1 day or 2 days or 3 days behind a cold front. And so I try to plan my guide trips and with the clients based off of, number one, what the conditions are, then I have to factor in their skill set involved in that also. I mean, some people just can't flip docks or they can't flip wood or whatever the case, so we manage that, let's put it that way. But with that being said, had we have gotten on the water that day daylight and ended up at 3 o'clock, we probably wouldn't do nearly as well as if that change in that bracketing change and played into the hands of the pressure dropping. And that can also help you tremendously here, you know, as far as recreational fishing. Now, if you're fishing a Berkeley tournament, you don't have that luxury. You're stuck with what you're stuck with.
Or any tournament.
Or any
fish the hours you get.
Because most of the tournaments are over with at 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to have the tools in your arsenal of saying,
you have to understand to adapt to those conditions.
And adapt to those conditions and say, well, I've got here it is, the pressure's 30-45 today. I've seen it as high as 30-63. And another little cool trick I learned with that is a guy had a mason jar one time, and he took, back in the old days, they had the 16-ounce Coke bottles, and he put about that much water in the mason jar, stuck the Coke bottle in the mason jar, right? And he set it on right next to the window in his kitchen. And on the days where the pressure was the highest, it would push the water from the mason jar up into the Coke bottle, right? And he drew a line on the high of those days, a black marker on the Coke bottle, and he would write on there when he learned what the highest it would ever go, he said, don't fish. All right, and then on the days that are the barometric pressure's 2970, 2980, all the water was gone out of the bottle. And so that shows you we can't feel it as humans, but it's actually there. And it pushes down on that, there goes that water. And so those fish feel that. And an example of that, I fished a tournament 3 years ago over on Bob Sandlin, and on a Friday, we caught 80 bass that day. And I told the guy I was fishing with, I said, this is going to be trouble because tonight this big front's coming in and the wind's going to be crispy tomorrow. Sure enough, the wind's blowing 35 out of the north, and of the 80 we caught that day, we had a good bag. The next day in that wind, we fished some areas where we still caught them. We caught 21 or 22, but we only had one big fish on and bounced it off the side of the boat trying to get in the boat. So we only had 10 pounds the day of the cold front.
Should have had bigger line.
No, that was we were throwing a chatterbait on a heavy enough line.
I'm kidding.
I was sitting in the wrong spot, retying, and the guy I was fishing with, he went to swing this 6-pounder in, boat flip it. And when he saw it, he was going to hit me with it. He tried to make an adjustment, and he flinched for a minute, and it hit the side of the boat and came off. So,
but that's
we didn't get a check because of that.
That's another thing that is a factor too. When you get those tougher conditions when they're not biting, is a lot of times the bites you do get, the fish aren't going to eat the bait as good. So if you are a tournament fisherman, or if you just happen to get a big one on during a tough bite, you need to be cognizant, be aware of the fact that there's a good chance that fish ain't going to have the hook very well.
Right.
When they're not biting as good, when it's tougher. A lot of times when fish will just get the tail hook on a crankbait or barely get skin hooked on that chatterbait versus having it eaten and choked. Whereas when they're feeding, a lot of them will have the whole bait in their mouth or whatever have you. So when you're under those tough conditions, when it comes to landing fish, be aware of that. Listen, y'all know me. I'm a boat flipper from way back. I'll boat flip the big ones.
Flipped everything yesterday.
But if I'm in a tournament and we're under tough conditions, we're going to reach for that net every time we get a chance on a keeper, because I know a lot of those fish are not going to have that bait a lot of times very well, and they're going to be skin hooked or barely hooked on the corner or something like that.
Yep. Truth in the pudding, especially yesterday, my tournament partner, they had a showdown deal yesterday over at Tawakoni, all right?
It's some kind of a one-on-one deal for a series championship.
One-on-one deal for the series championship, all right? And there was $4,000 first place at stake, all right? So he located some fish, and he wasn't getting over there to find these fish until late in the day. And I remembered him saying that man, I just destroyed them in a certain pattern in a certain area, all right? There was some great, found some places where there were grass, and now all of a sudden he says, what do you think about this north wind? And then it hits me. I said, didn't you catch all those fish late in the afternoon? And he said, yeah. He said, man, I probably had 27 pounds one day, one of the practice days, and 22 the other day. And I said, now you've not been in there early, have you? Not one day. He said, no. And I said, I said, you better beware. I mean, go slow, because I don't think you'll get as many bites. I talked to him last night, and he said, man, you couldn't believe it. I said, I still had some bites, but you can't believe how many I lost. Lost. He didn't lose those fish from 2 o'clock till dark, but from daylight till noon, he said it was ridiculous how many. They don't bite it quite as good. It's more of a reaction bite than a feeding bite. All right, so you have to take that in consideration also. And how you do that is the length of the time you wait before you set the hook. That helps, and it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Too many people are reactionary. When they go to try to, they get that bite, man, they want that fish in the boat. I've seen people freak out. They got a fish on, might be a 4-pounder. They're jumping around on that deck, man, and I mean, you'd swear they're just winching on this thing like their life depends on it.
They've been watching me too much.
No. Slow down. Let him run, tire him out. Oh, I'll lose him. So you have to do that under those conditions. They'll tire out pretty quick too. It's more amazing than you think. And if you'll notice one thing when you watch the pros on TV, how many times do you hear those guys say, "Oh, he's only got one hook. He looks like he's hooked good." The first pass that fish makes at the boat, they can tell, and that helps them to make a better decision on what they're going to do as far as letting that fish tire out so they can.
Well, even in our deal yesterday, you'll if you watch that video Monday and pay attention, you'll see there's a fish I catch on a square bill later on in the day, and the bait kind of was hung up in a rock right as the fish bit.
Oh, yeah,
and then the fish comes up, and I saw the whole crankbait sticking out of his mouth. I knew he just had one tail hook. And even when the fish was way out there, I told David, let's see if I can boat flip him with just one hook, one back hook or something like that. And if we were in a tournament, oh, no. I'd have been trying to keep that fish down and play him and begging David to hurry up with the net. You're going too slow, old man, all that good stuff, right? I'd have been getting after him. But because we were just out filming a video and we'd done caught plenty of fish, I was just like, well, let's see if we can get away with boat flipping. And I got away with it.
Yep. But it's rare.
But a lot of times you don't, I got away with it also because that fish had been hung up in that rock for a second, and I think it kind of stunned him and wore him down. He didn't really fight much. He just kind of skied across the top of the water, and you'll even, if you pay attention, you'll hear me panic at the end. I'm like, come on, because I can tell he's about to get his bearings and start shaking. If that fish would have shook as I lifted, I bet you money he'd have come off.
Yeah,
because he just had one tail hook. But I got away with it in the video because we were just filming a video. Normally in a tournament or even on a guide trip, I'd have been telling the customer, hold on.
Well, and
don't
even,
do that.
We went to one extra level, Billy and I did at the end of the day, and had a couple of pro tips on, and this is 10 times more critical than you can ever imagine, is rod handling these fish when you stick them. And I watch so many people, especially when the bites are far few and in between, it's the management of once you got that fish loaded up and getting him to the boat and getting him in the boat. Too many people, and I'm really, in the past 3 weeks, it's been amazing. Or you get a lot of saltwater people where they want to pump the rod. You know, they'll set the hook, and once they think that they've set the hook and got the fish hooked, then after that, I've seen people rods going on.
Well, Dave, we're not going in that now. We got a whole video on that Wednesday.
I know, but this is something
we got it coming up Wednesday.
That is something that's critical.
You can't give away the content's coming up Wednesday. It's going to air before that, man.
I'm telling you, as far as part of this game, as far as getting those fish,
it's important.
It's important in order to
and there's not
fill that data.
Really any discussion out there about it. So David brought that up, and he's like, man, there's really nothing out. He's right. There's really nothing out there on teaching people how to fight a fish and land them. So that was a great idea of his, and we did a video on that that'll be coming out Wednesday, and I added some stuff in there on how to get baits unhung that I've never seen anybody put on camera. So we're doing what we always do, man. We're trying to come up with new stuff to help you guys become better fishermen. Yeah, you know. And not that we're that great, but we've been lucky to spend enough time on the water. We learn tricks and when you're a guide and every jig that you hang up and break off goes to your bottom line, you kind of start learning some tricks on how to get them unhung. Or when every fish that comes in the boat is a valuable marketing tool, you learn tricks to land more of them. So we're putting that out on Wednesday, and that should be a good video. It's going to help a lot of people. We've talked about everything, I think, in detail on the changing conditions and how to adjust to them, except for the wind.
Yeah. And
so what do we do for no wind? What do we do when wind changes direction? How do we adjust to that, Dave?
Well, like I say, when it's a no-wind situation, but I know this is where I think the fish are, i.e. it goes right back to the light line deal, like when I dug that sinkhole out. Same exact story. Later, now if the wind's blowing in there, in that same, where we were throwing at, I would throw a swim jig in there. I like a swim jig better than most anything. He throws that square bill, and that square bill was unimaginably good at
the movement ADX.
The movement ADX was bouncing off everything. He only hung it up a couple of times, but I couldn't believe he was throwing it in the junk he threw it in. That same junk, I would throw a swim jig in, and I want something that's got a lot of kick to the tail. I usually use something that's got a lot of vibration to it, and you can adjust the amount of speed. I love a swim jig, especially in the fall, and I'll always have a white one tied on, and then have a black, brown, and amber, or something that's brimmy looking, and be able to swim it through that stuff. And if the wind's blowing in on it, now there's nothing wrong with having like this gentleman here had a spinnerbait tied on, and that's a good thing to work through some of that stuff. Also, when wind's blowing in there on it. If there's wood available, and I was telling him this yesterday, we hung up the chatterbait a lot of times on the wood. Chatterbait will hit it, flip right over, and the hook goes right into the wood.
Chatterbait's tough around wood.
A spinnerbait, though, is an ideal deal for that in particular deal, especially in the fall, especially when the temperatures are lower. And so I'll almost always have a couple of those tied on. For here, just to get the bites, I'm going with smaller blades. All right, I'm going to use a 1/4 ounce or a 3/8 with a smaller blade, and then if I'm getting some good bites, all of a sudden I catch a 5-pounder, I'll have another one tied on that's got the 4 or the 5 blade on it also.
For me, I base that blade size decision, which I love throwing a spinnerbait in the fall more than any other time of year, but I base that blade decision on the size of bait that I'm seeing in an area. And over the last month or so, it's pretty much been all real small shad, and we've been throwing really small bladed, willow blade spinnerbaits, usually a 1/4 ounce. I've gotten to that time of year now where I'm starting to throw bigger blades on my spinnerbaits because I'm seeing more and more of these bigger shad in the backs of these creeks and the areas where I'm finding the activity in the bass. I'm finding the bigger shad. So this is kind of the time of year where I'll transition, and now I'll kind of play with both like Dave's talking about. And then the later in the year, the colder it gets, I'll go to where I exclusively throw the bigger bladed spinnerbaits. It's kind of like with the swim baits. We start out, we're throwing a tiny little swim bait on a 3/0 underspin. Like right now, I'm throwing kind of going back and forth between that and a 4.5 inch on a 5/0 underspin. And then you can start doing it now if you want to, but it's really going to get good in November where you can throw the big swim baits. I mean, the full grown 7, 8, 9 inch swim baits are going to be a player over the next month or so. So that's kind of a deal for me. Those bait fish that you're seeing in the shallow water in the fall tend to progress upwards the cooler it gets until you get to about Thanksgiving, and then they start backing back out a little bit.
See, I have a little bit different take on that, the way that, because I fish the tournaments here too. When it's a tougher bite, whenever the bite is, I don't really look at the size of the shad as much as I do. I want the bite. and that's why we gear down. I'll have two spinner baits tied on, but the little blade serves two purposes. The number one purpose on that is that the smaller the profile, the better chance you have for something to grab it. That's number one. The second thing is that we're fishing in a lot of these tournaments here for unders, and I want a 2.5 or a 3 pound under. And a lot of time that smaller blade, you have a better shot at getting one of those to react to it. And then here lately, how many places we go into and we look, and all of a sudden you see the shad look about that big also.
Still a lot of that going on.
It ties in, but if you happen to get in an area where the bigger gizzard shad are and you see them around there, I will use the bigger one, but also too, you'll find that if it's the wrong time of the day, they just won't bite it.
Right.
Even though those shad are just as prevalent there as it can be, and until the right condition comes around to where it's favorable, then they'll hit it.
There's still a window where they're going to feed regardless.
Exactly.
And you're right, downsizing baits is always going to get more bites. I guess, we do have differences of opinions on things when it comes to bait selection and stuff like that at times. And I think that is a strict result in how many tournaments you fished in your history and still fish, and how few tournaments I fished over the last 5 years. I fished almost no tournaments over the last 5 years, so I'm going out on Lake Fork trying to catch all the slot fish I can most days of my life. Well, I want to throw bigger baits anytime I get a chance.
Yeah, it's a different thought train.
It is.
He's a big power fisherman. I mean, they're going to catch 9, 10, 11 pounders. This is what you're after, but I mean, I get a lot of people that call and book me for these tournaments too, because they want what we call stage walkers. They want to be able to get something it feels good to walk across the stage with a 228 or something like that, and we'll really go after those. But
when I get on good unders, it's a pure accident.
I'll accept the fact that people give me crap about only catching little fish. That's not exactly true. We just major in that, but we still spend a lot of time catching 7, 8, 9 pounders too. And strangely enough, boy, on a drop shot you can catch a lot of big fish here. I mean, the biggest one I've caught on here was in a tournament we won easily. I caught an 1161 on it in 8 foot of water. And
so many times of the year, and especially on a lake like Fork that has so many big fish in it, just getting more bites is going to lead to a big bite. Mm-hmm. Like, big fish are everywhere in this lake. They live all over this lake. And so if you're doing the tactics that David's talking about, where you're just focusing on how do I get more bites, so you get more bites all the time, and that's what David does, and he does it so well. Well, that's going to lead to, you're a higher percentage of your fish may be smaller, sure, but you're going to catch big ones when you're fishing for little ones on this lake. I mean, the third biggest fish that's ever come in my boat was caught on a wacky rig trickworm.
Yeah. On
12-pound line. I mean, it's big fish bite. As little time as I spend finesse fishing, still one of the biggest bass that's ever been in my boat came on a finesse bait. The big bass bite finesse baits, especially really, really giant bass, like the over 10 pounders, really tend to bite finesse baits because they're a little more harder to trick. They're a little more harder to fool. They've been around a little longer. They're a little more lethargic. 9 times out of 10, so slower moving baits can tend to get them to bite. Even on the baits that I like to fish for big fish that are power, maybe considered power fishing baits, like a big swim bait, like a hollow bodied frog, like a jig. These are considered power fishing baits, but every one of those baits has something in common. They create movement without much movement. So like a big swim bait, like a big soft plastic swim bait or a glide bait, is barely going, it goes forward at about this speed right here, literally. I mean, that's about it. But the tail on a soft plastic is going. So it's moving, and it's a power fishing bait, but it's barely moving because those true giants are so lethargic. A hollow body frog, we go, and it's sitting here doing all this, but where's it not going? Forward very much, right? It doesn't go forward. Like if you're really working a hollow body frog and walking it, making it, spitting it takes forever to fish an area with a hollow body frog because you're working it. It's not moving to you very fast. Same thing with a jig. We take a jig, we let it fall, and it sits there, and that skirt goes, and those claws go like this, and it's sitting there moving, but it's sitting dead still. And you're just, the way I fish a jig 9 times out of 10 is I just creep it over anything I can cover-wise, root system, brush piles, hop it out of grass, let it fall, but it's not moving to me very fast at all. It's moving very slow coming to me, and I'm letting it fall, hit the bottom hard, and go, right? And so it's movement without movement, even on the power fishing baits that catch the trophy bass most of the time. Or you can go finesse, and you can catch the trophy bass on those as well. On top of that, you also catch a lot of smaller fish.
Well, he said the key thing a while ago too. Here's the perfect scenario. He said this lake. On this lake, And when I go to Sam Rayburn, I don't know that I've maybe once or twice ever thrown a drop shot on Sam Rayburn. Almost never. Literally. That lake has a whole different mindset on how you fish there. A lake that used to have a lot of grass, we did a lot of flipping on grass. We throw big rattle traps. We throw, depends on the time of year, chatterbait is a big player there on that lake. And I use big swim baits over there.
I'm moving to Rayburn. I'm done.
Yeah. And so
I go throw big traps and chatter. I'm moving to Rayburn.
Yeah, Rayburn's a real cool lake for that kind of stuff. So drop shot really doesn't fit in that well. But here about 3 years ago, I guess, on Lake of the Pines during September, we had a championship over there and really discovered a pattern with the lake at the level it was, where on the main river itself there was giant stumps sticking out of the water that I noticed. And what I got to even notice even more when you look at the graph, the mapping on the graph, there was sloughs that ran off of that thing. Now this was pretty far up north there, and so I said, well, I'm going to do something they ain't never seen before. So I just picked a drop shot and started flipping with 12-pound line, flipping those stumps on the edge of the river, and then especially up maybe 20, 30, 40 yards into the sloughs that you couldn't see them unless you had your graph set up right. And we ended up finishing 10th in the championship, on that pattern alone. I had to fish the first day by myself, and then because my tournament partner was fishing a championship at one of these other lakes, and then he came in on Sunday, and so that type of deal is, we had a good tournament. We were really one fish away from finishing in the top 3 if we'd have just got another 5-pounder, so those type of things are thinking outside the box. A jig probably would have worked on that. A creature bait of some sort, flipping it on a 1/2 ounce weight or a 3/8 ounce weight would have worked. But when something like that goes down on lighter line, when that weight hits the bottom, that worm stops and then wiggles like this right there in the water. It moves around like this with the weight being on the bottom. If you throw a jig in there, that thing's gonna sink straight to the bottom next to that stump, all right? And the only thing you'll have is the claws on the top, just moving a little bit. And so I found in that environment with that weight, with that bait being about that far off the bottom, that drew extra bites. And so we had a good tournament based off of that. So, what you can take away from today in this time we've spent here is play the changing conditions, and those are some tips that'll help
be
you
aware of them, right?
To be aware of them. Yeah,
be really aware.
The more
of
you
them.
do it, and now we were all taught things as we go on. We run with a clique of guys. Even in my old job, we had a clique of guys that helped each other in order to say what if. What if's a great term, and so that helps you to mature in your thought of what you're doing in order to make you better. And so if I did this, what would happen? And then you bounce it off these people that are in your clique. And then the next thing you know, well, I did this, I did that, I did this, that. Next thing you know, you get incrementally better. The whole game is about climbing rungs of the ladder. The higher you climb that ladder, the better you're getting. And so that's what deals like this are all about.
I can tell you for me, fishing as much as I have over the last 5 years, it becomes a deal where it's easy to lose track or lose focus on those little changing conditions, on the moon cycle, on the pressure, on the wind, because you got to go fishing every day. You go fishing every day, and you take a look at the wind and the water temperature, and you just kind of go fishing, right? And I know I caught them in this area, so we'll go figure out how to catch them in that area again today. We'll move around a little bit, we'll adjust baits, whatever, and it's just kind of a random deal. Whereas if you're paying more attention to those changing conditions, and I'm as bad about it as anybody, here's where I caught them, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to figure out how to catch them in there. Well, I probably waste a lot of time at times for myself and my customers because I didn't pay attention to the fact that it's a full moon cycle. They're probably not going to bite at 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't pay attention to the fact that, the wind changed direction, whatever it may be. I just missed. I just got in my boat, went fishing because I do it every day. So for David to be a guy that's done it this long and for him to be as in tune as he is with all these little things, it's really impressive. But it's helped me learn some things I didn't know and really refocus and learn you need to be into it. Because when I only fished once a week or twice a week, man, I was locked in on all that stuff then because I was thinking about it all week. What's the water temperature doing all week while I'm not there? What's the wind doing while I'm not there? What's the barometric pressure? I was thinking about all that stuff going into that 1 or 2 days I got to fish every week back in them days. Now, when you go every day, it's easy to lose track of that. But David is great about details and all that type of stuff. And you were like that with your bowling. He got to talk to me about it. For those that don't know, it's a Hall of Fame bowler right here. Dude's literally in the bowling Hall of Fame.
That's the old life.
But one thing that really it relates to this was, I think maybe one of the only conversations we've ever had about bowling, because I know nothing about ball. Throw the ball. It's like how I fish. Throw the ball as hard as you can at that middle pin.
No, that don't work.
That's it. That's the only way I know how to bowl. So no, it doesn't work at all. I can tell a terrible bowler. I can't even hardly break 100. But he was telling me about like different weighted balls and different gravity centers on balls, and different wax on the lanes to get them to spin a certain way. And I'm like, what the hell? This guy thinks he's got a whole lot more thought process going.
Unbelievable science to it.
Yeah.
You would never imagine, and even the company that I was working for developed some technology with the shoes in order to strengthen your leverage position by the way we designed the bottom of it in order to create what's called gradual braking, where it would force the foot to stop at the right time when the ball was right here. And so by technology, we help people be better players through technology. And, kind of looking to incorporate some of this into the fishing game, where taking, on critical days like today, slap back down to 12-pound line, just gets bites. And then, with a Cinco or drop shot or shaky head, whatever the case. And then as the day, as now all of a sudden the good beaming sun out, water's warming a little bit, now we can go back. And sure enough, this was the thing that capped it, was that, about 1 o'clock, 1:30, we went down this one bank in the morning, throwing chatterbait, trap, all this. We didn't get any bites. Now we go down that bank at 1 o'clock, 1:30. I catch a 4-pounder, and he catches one on a square bill. We end up having 3 or 4 bites going down a very similar bank that was real close to it. Why? Because the sun had warmed the water up incrementally. We got afternoon, and now
the wind started blowing on that bank all day. In the morning there was no wind.
The puzzle came together, and then boom, we got bites.
Yep.
So,
but that's what I wanted to bring that bowling deal up for us, because this guy's so detail oriented, and that's the one thing you can learn from, and that's why I wanted him to talk about it in depth like he did tonight for so long, is because pay attention to those details. I've always stood by this. People ask me, how do you become a better fisherman? What's the best way to become a better fisherman? The number one best way to become a better fisherman is to pay more attention to every bite you get, to every changing conditions, even the bites you get. What was the bait doing when he bit it? Did you just pause it for a second? Were you reeling at this speed, or were you reeling at this speed? Did you shake it right before he bit it? Did you snap it out of ground? Like all those little details about every bite you get, and that goes even further into every changing condition. The wind just changed direction today. The wind was blowing earlier, now it's not. It wasn't blowing earlier, now it is. Just like we just talked about on that bank line. Paying attention to all those little details and really considering all those factors is going to help you put the odds in your favor, because make no mistake about it, this game is gambling. Like, we're gambling. That's what we're doing. We're taking our best guess. We're trying to predict what will happen, and we're placing our bets on they're going to bite this bait in this area at this time. And so the more that you take in every factor into that decision, the better bet you're going to place.
And yesterday was an interesting study that every one of you need to pay attention to, and it's where you make that cast. All right, because we're setting pole down on this one spot, and I watched him make a cast over there, and automatically I have a visual on the shoreline. There's a tree, or there's a house, or there's something unique that when you throw it at that target, pay attention to where that cast goes, and then you stick a big fish, then repeat that cast to that landmark or to whatever the case. Because a lot of times those fish can be in an area that's really small.
Really small.
Really, really small. And so most people don't even think about that. And then the next thing, I'll watch the clients, and they'll make a cast, they'll catch one. The next cast is about 30 yards over here this way. So they're not thinking about repeating that, and there's a reason why that those fish may be there. There might be a little slope or some nuance there about that bottom that was holding those fish.
Well, when I caught the last fish of the day, I was having a hard time getting him hooked on that crankbait, and I couldn't get the pole. The poles were just kind of, power poles every once in a while just decide not to go down. So I was like, David, just take over trolling mark, but don't go anywhere, because I want to make another cast right there. That's right. That's always something you want to do. And really the best cast of the day
with the one David cheeseburgered me on.
David, why you gotta say cheeseburger? Don't you calling me fat?
Cheeseburgered
so
me
David
on.
catches a fish,
a 3-pounder.
No big deal. Catch 3-pounder.
I rigged up the bait, got it back.
No.
I throw back up there.
Gets another bite. Misses,
and I miss it. And now
his bait's in there, and he goes and fixes his worm. I go, David, look at that worm again. I don't think you got it right. Well, I was giving myself time. So I told him to look at his worm again. He pulls it up and looks at it again, and I go, phew,
He hole pirated
caught the
me.
biggest one of the day.
He caught a
right there.
pounder on exactly where I was getting those bites because he paid attention. There was a little mark up on the bank right there. He threw it right to that little mark, and I was like, "You dog!"
Caught the biggest one of the day. Yeah, I even told him, I was like, dude, you didn't get your worm right. Check it again.
Okay, I go one step further too, about what we were talking about a while ago with being a little bit too analytical, but I'm getting a little bit up in the age, and it's, I want to remember everything. I was looking at my records. I keep records of every guide trip, what we did, where we went, how many fish we caught. I mean, the quality of skill of the anglers, because these people are coming back too, and so I want to be well prepared when they get back, so I'll know exactly what I'm going to have rigged up, and with their skill set, I'm going to try to put people in. Either we could go to a different lake. I want somewhere for them to have a great day, and let's say they're not really good. They're novice or amateur anglers. I want to put them somewhere where they'll have the best chance to have a fantastic day. And I keep those records in the book. Well, the thing I was looking for the most is last year in the fall, a pattern all of a sudden erupted that was absolutely incredible when the lake was between 2 1/4 foot low and 2 1/2 foot low. And what I was interested in is what was the water temperature. All right, I could go back and look at the USGS that has a breakdown on every lake, go back and type in the dates and see. Instead, I just glanced at the book, the water was 62 degrees. So that pattern is coming. It's coming. And I wanted to see when it was. When we smoked them on that pattern, it was December the 9th. So I'm looking ahead. I had him look at something the other day when we were driving around. I wanted him to go over this certain deal right there, and I was just glued to that screen looking to see if those barfish have showed up there yet. It's too early yet, but they will be there. And when the water gets down into the upper 60s, water's still a little bit too hot yet. But that pattern, when that comes along, that's in between these two. It'll be game on for a while that water stays in the 60s. So these are things you just have to, I don't know. When it's your job, you do these things. For recreation, it's good to know it. It's good to learn it, and it's good to keep some notes on it because you know what? Next year, you may come over here and the lake is 2 foot over pool. And you're thinking, well, I whacked them last year over here at this certain area. And you go in there and there's a 4 foot differential in the water level. It might not work.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions tonight? I know we've gone on and on. Me and Dave can do that pretty well. So. All right, no questions. Hey, well, thank you guys for coming and joining us tonight. We want to, as always, we appreciate Lake Fork Marina so much. So y'all go down there and buy some tackle, show them some love and support. They're just a great facility here on Lake Fork, and they do a great job of letting us take over their deal every 2 weeks. So we'll be back here in 2 weeks. Thank y'all for coming.